Good morning, dear friends, dear colleagues. 15 years ago, the Science Centre community convened in Canberra, Australia. There was a workshop about the bright future of science centres and museums. Strangely enough, I still remember when we were asked how to crystallize in 3 words the bright future of science centres. Strangely enough, I still remember the 3 words I wrote down: dialogue, relevance, and charm. And I think we are there now in the bright future of science centres, having Nina Simon as our keynote speaker. With her books, the Participatory Museum and the Art of Relevance, she has charmed not only us, but the museum community by large and beyond. Many cultural institutions take their inspiration from Nina these days. Nina is the director of the Museum of Art and History in Santa Cruz, California, but she has worked in and with many other museums, starting from the Museum of Science in Boston, and then in the International Spy Museum, Washington, D.C., and the Tech in San Jose, California. After this keynote speech, her great books will be available for purchase and signing just outside of this room. And after the keynote, there will be a discussion session with Nina, chaired by Emily Dawson. So please join me in welcoming Nina Simon on stage. Welcome, Nina.
This is good. Okay, great. I have to just start by saying what an honor it is to be with you. I was saying to Miko before that I started out in science centers. The very first conference I ever went to was an Aztec conference in 2004, and I was so nervous to hear from all of these leaders in the field, and I really felt unable to say anything to them. And I see many of you are here 14 years later in this room, but I will try to quell my nervousness and channel it into appreciation and honor for all the expertise and imagination that's here in this room. I bet that you can think of something that matters to you that you wish mattered to more people. Maybe it's a program at your center. Maybe it's a big global issue. Maybe it's an organization in your community that you love. Today, I want to share with you a few of the ideas that I've learned about how you can take those things that are outside, those people who are outside of your world, and invite them into that thing that matters most to you. I come to this inquiry around relevance from my role running the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History, a small museum in Santa Cruz, California, a small town on the coast of California. And now the MA, this is what it looks like, has become a really vibrant community center in Santa Cruz that we're very proud of. But it didn't look like this 6 years ago when I came to become its new director. At the time, we did not matter enough to enough people in our community. And that was causing 2 really big problems. The first was money. We didn't have any. The day I walked in the door as our new director, we had $16,000 in the bank, we had $36,000 in unpaid bills, and there was no grant or foundation check on its way. The board was talking about closing the doors of the museum. At the same time, though, we had an even bigger problem. And that was a problem of relevance. There were more people who knew that this building used to be the county jail than knew that it was now a museum, which it had been at this point for 20 years. And it was in the face of this dual crisis, a financial crisis and a relevance crisis, that the board decided to act, to take a different path with the museum. And it was in the context of that crisis that I was hired. And we said, we need to make this museum matter more to more people. How do you do that? We couldn't just tell people on the street, hey, this is really important, you got to come in here. Instead, we said, we have to change the meaning of what's going on inside these walls, and we have to make it easier for people to imagine that this is a place they want to go. And so we said, we are going to make the museum, the MA, a welcoming gathering place for our community. Have it be seen as a social place as opposed to a place you come to solo. And we said, you know, instead of saying we have the art, we have the history, we have the stories, we have the collections, we are going to take the attitude that the creativity and the culture, the art and history of our community lives beyond our walls. And we have to go find it, and we have to share it, we have to ignite it, and we have to preserve it, we have to bring it inside and hold it for our community. And we do these things so that 3 outcomes will happen. So that people will bond with people who they love, but more importantly, that people will bridge with people who are different from them. You know, growing up in my profession, in science centers and museums, I think we're all very comfortable with the fact that there's a lot of bonding that happens inside our walls. A lot of people come with their friends, come with their family, and we're pretty sure they're going to have a great time together. But in our experience, we found that the more important purpose, the opportunity we have, is to fill a gap around bridging, to be a place where people will break out of the bubbles of the people they already know and form a connection with somebody from a different background, a different generation, a different culture, a different history. And then finally we said, you know, and this is absolutely a page out of the Science Center book, we said, you know, art museums in particular, a lot of people feel disempowered by them. You feel like you're not smart enough, you're not wealthy enough, you're not whatever enough to be able to understand or appreciate what's on the walls. And coming from a Science Center background, I could never understand why in science centers, the message is, you can be a scientist, you can be an engineer. But in an art museum, the message is, maybe if you learned a lot, you could learn to appreciate this thing that somebody else has made that is on this wall. And so we said, we want to flip that. We want people to walk out saying, I can be an artist. I can make creative work. I can be a historian. I can make a difference in our community. And I feel empowered by this experience to do so. We took all of these ideas and we put them together into a 1-page playbook. I know you can't read this, but what's important here is to say 2 things. One, that we have 1 piece of paper that helps all of our staff understand and all of our community understand what we exist to do. And 2, this statement at the very bottom, that the reason we exist is not for learning, it's not for art, it's not for history. The reason we exist is to try and build a stronger and more connected community. We changed our museum not by changing the building, but by changing the purpose at its heart, and by inviting people in for a new meaning and a new relationship with the institution. We did not do this for a philosophical reason. We did this because the museum was going to close. And I'm always fascinated when we talk about participatory work or we talk about engaging with new communities. It's so often seen as charity work or as programs that are going to be lost for the institution. In our case, taking this approach transformed our institution from one that was failing to one that was thriving. In my first 5 years, we were able to more than triple our attendance, and our attendees went from being older retirees and school kids to now reflecting the full age and income diversity of our community. And we're very close now on ethnicity as well. And then we took that $16,000 in the bank and we were able to build it to 1.6 million. We were able to grow our staff from 7 to 25 people. We were able to expand out into the community, deepening our meaning and our ability to push on that impact than ever before. Now, of course, as a director, I love these numbers. I love being able to make payroll. I love seeing people who are excited about the museum. But all of this change also raised a very basic question. Who are all these people who now love and invest in the museum and who didn't even know it existed 6 years ago? Why are they coming? What's relevant to them now that wasn't relevant before? Are they coming because of this social experience? Are they getting involved because we are engaging with art and history in new places, with new partners, in new ways? Or are they coming because we're changing the content of what's in the wall on the most traditional side of what we do? It was in the context of all these questions that I wanted to go deeper, and I wanted to understand more about this basic question. what is relevance? And how do we decide as individuals every day where we're going to spend our time and attention and what we're going to ignore? And it's that question that sent me on this path to writing this book and to sharing these stories with you today. So first, I think so often, and Miko shared this beautifully about how in 2003 he shared these words, dialogue, relevance, charm. So often I've been at conferences where one of the first things that happens is somebody will stand up, somebody very important, and they'll say, "We must make our work relevant." And everybody agrees. And then there's no further description of what that might mean or what that definition might be. And so the very first thing I was curious about is, what is relevance? What does this word actually mean? And the first thing I learned was very disappointing, and that is this. Nothing is relevant to everyone. Not climate change, not Beyonce, not science centers, right? We can say all the time, institutions all the time, we try and declare relevance by fiat. We'll say things like, climate change is relevant to everyone because we all live on this world, this planet. Or Shakespeareans will say, Shakespeare is relevant to everyone because it illuminates the human condition. Yes, climate change is important. Shakespeare is important, but that doesn't make them relevant. We choose as individuals every day what we're going to attend to and what we're going to ignore. No one can make that choice for us. So how do we decide? The researchers who study relevance have basically said, look, there are two things we use to decide if something's relevant to us. We ask ourselves two questions. How much meaning am I going to get out of this experience, this content, this event? And how much effort will it take for me to get that experience? Take the example of us all being here at Ecsite. Everybody who's here is here probably because we believe that there's a meaning to be gained from being at this conference, right? There's a meaning in terms of the learning, in terms of the connecting with each other, in terms of being in this beautiful place. But we also know that there are many people in our institutions, in our fields, who are not here in Porto today. And that's because the effort involved, when measured against that meaning you might get, was too much. It was too expensive, it was too far, the dates were wrong. We make these decisions every day. How much meaning will I get? How much effort will it take? And we use those things to decide what's relevant to us. How much meaning will I get out of making a robot in this exhibit? Will it help me feel proud of myself? Will I enjoy making it? How much effort will it take? Will I get glue on my hands? Will it be uncomfortable? Will I feel foolish? How much meaning would I get out of volunteering in my community? How much effort would it take for me to find an opportunity where I really feel like I'm giving value? How much meaning would I get out of going into this bar? How much effort would it take for me to decide to walk in the door? We ask these questions every day, and we use them to decide what's relevant to us. And these questions have led me to a definition I've been using of relevance, which is this, that if you imagine your institution or that meaningful work that you do as living inside a locked room, whether physical or metaphorical, relevance is the key that unlocks that meaning. Relevance is not the meaning itself, it's the thing that invites you in to have that meaningful experience. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of our institutions find ourselves in these situations. We know that there is great stuff, meaningful stuff behind our doors, but outside our doors, people are just walking by. All they see is a locked door, and they don't know. Is there meaning for me in there? Is it worth the effort to find the key to get inside? When we do this work of relevance, we're fundamentally talking about this question. How from the outside can somebody feel invited to unlock the meaning that might be within? And for me, in my career, I've been much more interested in this question of how we work with outsiders than how we work with insiders. Every institution has insiders, right? Our members, our volunteers, our visitors who eagerly, enthusiastically open that door all the time. They know that there's meaning for them. They have a key. They take it out. They walk in. They have a great experience. But I'm more curious about those people on the outside, those people who either are passing by or who are looking at the door, unsure if it's for them. I think we have this fantasy about how we are going to invite outsiders in that looks like this. I think we have a fantasy that we say, okay, we'll start with what we have for insiders, the people, the programs, the building, And we'll just open the doors wider, and the outsiders will come in. I think any of us who've tried to do this work, I was hearing the wonderful panel that was happening here before, know that this is not the problem the outsiders have. Remember, these are people who don't even see your door or think that it's meaningful for them. So it doesn't matter if it's open more hours of the day. Instead, what I found is that growth looks more like this. You have these insiders, you have the programs that work for them, and to invite in outsiders looks like this. Now, there's a safe side to this picture. This is what our growth looked like at the MA. And in our case, most of the Purple Circle people stayed. Most of the people who loved the traditional art and history museum love this vibrant, vital, diverse museum we now have. I have 85-year-old donors who say, I love seeing teenagers in the museum. I have one donor, one of my favorite things I've ever heard is from a former board member who said, I love that when I walk into the museum now, I always see and meet somebody new. There are fewer than you might think of the insiders who say, this was my private club and you wrecked it. There are only a few of those. But here's the scary side of this picture. To have this kind of growth, to engage these outsiders, we had to take perfectly nice walls in the existing metaphorical building of what we were doing, and we had to tear them down and turn them into doors. Now, for outsiders, that was appealing. It was creating new doors for them. But for insiders, construction work on a perfectly nice wall is not appealing. They are saying, what are you doing? This is confusing. This is annoying. This is loud. Why can't those outsiders come in the doors that we come in every day? Thank you very much. Let me show you an example of what this tension looks like. This is the flyer from the very first Popup Museum we ever did in Santa Cruz County. A Popup Museum is a museum you can make anywhere in the world. There's a template for it, an open source template at popupmuseum.org. Basically, people bring their own objects on a theme, handwrite labels for those objects, and boom, Popup Museum. So this was the very first one we did. It was the night before Valentine's Day, and the theme was F My Ex. The idea was you brought an object from a failed relationship. We were inspired by the Museum of Broken Relationships. You brought an object from a failed relationship to a bar. You hand wrote a label, a story about that object. We had drink specials. Boom, Pop-Up Museum. I think you can probably imagine, looking at this flyer in its neon pink glory, how for a certain kind of person in our progressive college town, this flyer was a key to a door they did not know existed. People got this flyer and they said, whoa, this looks fun, this looks cool. I didn't know we had a museum. I'm gonna go to this. I think you can probably also imagine our traditionalists, our Purple Circle people who looked at this flyer and were concerned. And I will say one thing I've learned is not to put the letter F alone on a flyer again. But more seriously, we heard from insiders who said, you know, the ephemerality of this program, the irreverence of the program, it runs counter to what I think a museum should be doing. And so we asked the intern who was running this program to write a blog post about this tension in creating a new program to invite in outsiders that was at the same time confusing insiders. It was exactly this problem of outsiders saying, ooh, new door, and insiders saying, why is there a construction site and why is there a neon pink door over there? And so she wrote this blog post and we got a very interesting comment in from a guy who said, I'm closer to the stodgy traditional museum supporter than to the audiences you're currently trying to reach, but I strongly support your outreach and attempts to involve new communities. It is precisely because of that outreach that I finally became a museum member last year. There was no reason to do so before, since, in his opinion, the museum was doing nothing. I still have little occasion to go to the museum, but I'm willing to support it as an important community resource. I think this guy is so interesting because here he is saying, I'm a Purple Circle Museum person, and that museum did not work for me. It was not relevant for me. I didn't come in. I didn't buy in. I didn't see meaning for me in there. But now I'm investing my money and my support because I see meaning in a new way as a place that brings together the diversity of our community. Of course, this is the positive side of this story. We also still deal every day at my museum with the friction and the confusion that comes when you open new doors in what had formerly been very nice walls. Sometimes we get people who are downright racist. When we started doing bilingual labels, our community is about 35% Latino and Spanish-based, and we started shifting to being a fully bilingual institution, and we had a member who said, I don't understand why you're doing all this for these people. They don't appreciate art and culture. They don't deserve their own door into your space. But actually, these kinds of issues are fairly easy for us to deal with. When somebody says this, we feel like, oh, good, we're doing the right thing, screw you. What's a little harder for us are comments like this. When we started building that theory of change, that one-page document that tells our story and is our playbook, we were with our trustees, our board, and our staff, and we had this board member say, I don't understand why we have this empowerment track. I don't go to a museum to be empowered. And I had to turn to her and say, Cynthia, you're the mayor of Santa Cruz. I'm pretty sure you've got a lot of other opportunities to be empowered in our community. And the reason we fight these battles is not because we are masochists. The reason we fight these battles is because we believe that there are people on the outside who deserve to be part of this great conversation that's happening in the museum, and whose stories, whose art, whose history deserves to be amplified in our space. And those outsiders are people like Jasmine. This is from an excerpt from an email that was sent out to our membership last year from a young Latina librarian in Santa Cruz named Jasmine Avila. And she says this, she says, growing up in LA, I was surrounded by my Latino culture. There were constant reminders of who I am. Santa Cruz always felt like something was missing, like parts of me were missing, even after being here for 7 years. The MA is special to me because it fills that gap. It reflects my story, my history, and my culture. And Jasmine goes on to talk about how she became involved because we were inviting her in through a door that spoke to and amplified the things that she's proud of, the parts of her that help make her the incredible woman who she is. We mostly try not to choose between insiders and outsiders at our museum. We like to say we are a museum of and. When people have questions, they say, why are there these interactive elements in the museum? We say, look, the museum is like a restaurant with a very big menu. And I want to make sure there are things on the menu for you, but you don't boycott a restaurant because there are some things on the menu that you don't like to eat. And especially with insiders in the beginning, they would complain about Friday night festivals. And they say, oh, why are you doing these loud, participatory community festivals? That's not what a museum's about. And I would always say to them, all these newcomers who are coming on Friday night to these festivals, none of them are saying to me, why are you open Tuesday at 2 p.m.? Or why do you have archives? They are generous about the fact that there are things on the menu that aren't for them. Can't you be generous about opening up a bigger conversation about what can happen here? We try to say and not or. But when I have to decide between grappling with an insider's confusion about the new construction and inviting in somebody who's saying for the first time they feel a sense of belonging and that they can fully express themselves in this community, I'm always going to choose empowering the outsider and say to the person on the inside with privilege, learn to be a little more generous and a little more open to the doors that we could open here. So where do you find the outsiders, the Jasmines of this world? The answer is very simple. You go outside the building. People live outside of our institutions, and especially if you're trying to reach people who haven't historically come in, you're going to find them and connect with them in their worlds and not in yours. Ultimately, relevance is not about us selling a program to somebody or figuring out how we might do so. Relevance is about really empathizing with how it feels to stand outside that door and have to decide, is there something for me in here? Is there meaning? Is it worth it? What is it going to feel like to go inside? Remember this bar? My guess is there are some people here in this audience today who see an invisible welcome sign above this bar. You don't have to identify yourselves. It looks fun. It looks intriguing. You want to go in. My guess is there are other people in this room who see an invisible keep out sign above this bar. It looks dirty. It looks imposing. You want to pass by. We see these invisible welcome and keep out signs everywhere in the communities where we walk, and they're not just in the physical space. I was recently in one of the biggest science centers in the US and noticed that they had a cop in the lobby. And I said, why is there a cop in your lobby? And they said, well, we've done surveys with the families who visit, and they feel more comfortable here. They feel safer with a cop in the lobby. And I said, okay, but we're in a big urban area at a time of heavy police violence issues, and I know you're trying to reach some new audiences. Have you talked to them about how they feel about a cop in a lobby? Because something that says welcome to one person can say keep out to another. At the MA, the way we learn about these welcome and keep out signs is from outsiders. They are the only people who can tell us what looks like welcome and keep out to them. These are just a few of the 2,000 partners we work with annually in our community to do our work. This is a group called C3 that was inspired by the Science Gallery's Leonardo group, actually, a group of community leaders from all different walks of life in Santa Cruz County who help us think about where we might go. And I look at this picture and I see health workers, bike advocates, tech workers, farmers, all different kinds of people who can say, hey, for my community, here's what welcome looks like. So let's build a door like this over here. We actually take an approach to programming that we call community first program design, where we say, let's start not with the project and the program, but let's start with the community who we want to engage. Let's learn about the assets and needs of that community, not just what they're looking for, but also the assets, what they're proud of, what they want to share. And let's build projects and collaborations based on that. Let me give you an example of what this looks like in a science center context. The London Science Museum, a few years ago, decided that they really wanted to engage the deaf community of London. And one of the things that they decided to do as part of that was to take their science shows. Who here has live science shows? I'm sure most people do. It's okay to raise your hand. Okay, great. I'm not going to call on you. Great. So they decided to take their live science demos and figure out a way to make them accessible to deaf families. So, you know, these demos, they're very lively. There's all kinds of experiments and excitement and noise going on in the middle of the stage. And then they added a deaf sign language interpreter to the side of the stage. And they advertised this opportunity, and they saw what happened. And what happened was that a few deaf families came, but they were underwhelmed by what they got, and they did not come back. And the Science Museum was really committed to engaging these families, so they said, wait a second, we've got to learn more about what went wrong here. And so they decided, okay, let's go back and take a community-first approach here. And so they invited a bunch of deaf families in to see these new shows that they'd done, and the families were immediately able to tell them what was wrong. They said, you know, you've got this very active experiment going on right over here with these actors and fire and all kinds of things going on. But for me to understand what they're talking about, I have to pay attention to an interpreter who's way over here and who, by the way, is not nearly as expressive and emotive as the actors who you're using for the experiment. And furthermore, some of your shows, the aha of the experiment has to do with a bang or a very loud noise, which either I can't hear or is distressing if I'm hearing impaired. And so the museum said, okay, this is all really interesting. We hadn't even thought about this thing. How can we change this? And they decided that what they would do was not to have a sign language interpreter over here, but to have a deaf performer here and have audio overhead on the speakers. So that if you had a family with a mix of people who were hearing impaired or deaf and people who were hearing, everybody could watch the actors doing the experiments, and people who were hearing could still hear the voiceover if that was the way they wanted to get the information. And furthermore, that was kind of the needs side. But then the deaf families also said, hey, you know, an asset that you are not tapping into by having an interpreter for every a few shows is the fact that we are a community. We're not families who are randomly scattered out there with deaf people in them. We really get together. We identify as a community, and we like to spend time as a group. So the other thing the museum did was they said, okay, instead of every once in a while having a show that operates in this way, we're going to create these events called scientific. We're going to create a day a month where we're really advertising to the deaf community, here's a day when all the shows are going to be of this nature, and there are going to be other opportunities that are really specifically targeted to inviting you to enjoy the museum the way you've told us you like to enjoy it, which is as a community and as a group. The The resulting program has been incredibly successful, and it works because they rooted it not in what the museum thought that deaf people needed, but in what deaf people and what the community said in terms of here are our needs and here are our assets. By the way, this story would be easy to tell as a failure story if after they set up the first interpreters, the museum gave up. If they said, well, that didn't work, oh well, we can't figure this out, we wouldn't be telling this story. The reason that it's a success is because they were able to shift that failure by talking to the community at the root of what they were interested in. All of us on the inside are going to make mistakes in engaging outsiders at first. We're going to make prejudgments that are going to be wrong. But I've found, and I've seen in all of these examples around the world, that if you can say to a community, we're interested, we're curious, we want to root in where you're coming from, we're sorry if we've screwed this up in the past, there's an opportunity to take it in a very successful direction. For me, these outsiders with whom we work have really become heroes because they are the visionaries who can help us see where doors could be where there currently are walls, who can help us see keep out signs we don't even know are there. One of my heroes in this way is Betty Reed Soskin. Betty is the oldest park ranger in the United States National Park Service. She's in her 90s now. She joined the Park Service in her 80s as an interpreter, and she's just an extraordinary human being. But the reason I bring her up right now is because of her uniform. One of the many extraordinary things about Betty is that she doesn't just wear her uniform when she's on the clock at the park. She wears it after she clocks out on the streets of the cities of Oakland and Alameda. And she says, you know, when I wear my uniform on the streets of the city, I am announcing to young people of color a career path and an opportunity in the parks that I didn't know existed until I was in my 80s. And Lord knows I don't want other people to have to wait that long to figure it out. Betty is using her uniform as a kind of key, right? She's standing at the door, opening it to her community and saying, hey, the Park Service is for you. But remember, what looks like welcome for one community can say keep out to another. This is another one of my heroes, an outsider hero in the Park Service. This is Cam Juarez. Cam works in Tucson, Arizona at Saguaro National Park. His job is to invite Latinos into that park. And one of the very first things Cam said when he came to do this job was he said, you know, for my community, for Latinos living near the border with Mexico, this uniform you're all so proud of, it is not a welcome sign. It is a keep out sign for our community. The hardest part of working with outsiders is not finding them. It's listening to them. When they say to you, that uniform that you love, that building that you're so passionate about, it's a keep out sign for me, what do you do? That was the challenge faced by the State Library of Queensland just a few years ago. The next time you're in Brisbane, Australia, do yourself a favor and visit the State Library of Queensland. It's one of the most beautiful libraries I've ever seen. And I happened to be there just after it opened in 2009. It's this open plan, white, gleaming, super contemporary, gorgeous space. And I was there because the library had made a commitment that they wanted to be for everybody in their part of Australia. And so they wanted to create an Indigenous knowledge center, a place specifically to honor and to connect people around Aboriginal knowledge and knowledge sharing, just as they do with all kinds of knowledge in the library. And so I was there with a group of librarians, architects, designers, and then Aboriginal elders from the community to talk about what this Indigenous knowledge center might be. So there we were sitting in one of these beautiful, new, white, gleaming, open spaces. And the very first thing that the Indigenous leaders said was, you know, for us, sharing knowledge doesn't mostly happen around books. It happens through music. It happens through dance. It happens intergenerationally. And it's got to be colorful. It can't be so sterile, like a hospital. And you could see the librarians looking at their beautiful, new, white, gleaming space with new eyes. And then the Indigenous knowledge bearers said, you know, the most important way we share knowledge is around a fire. I don't know how many librarians you know, but this was a moment of truth. They had to decide, were we for real when we said we wanted to invite Indigenous people into this library to make a door for them to feel like it was their library too? Or were we secretly hoping that they would just walk through the white gleaming doors that we've already spent so much time and so much money to create. And to their great credit, they were for real. And they took one of those white gleaming spaces and they made it a colorful, intergenerational space for music and dance. And even more impressively, they identified an outdoor space and they built a fire pit. So that groups like this Indigenous World Youth Congress could decide this is the place we want to meet and connect and share knowledge. This is the place that has meaning for us in this way, which is, by the way, exactly what the library's mission is all about. So I invite you today, and as you go back to your space, to think about the room, physical and metaphorical, where your work lives. And think about the doors it has and who they open to. You know, you all have a great advantage working in science centers. I started out working in science centers like you, which are at their heart audience-centered. And now I work in the arts. You know, arts institutions have a lot of front doors that look like this. And there's a lot of pride and loyalty built up in this sense that these are the doors that enter into an arts experience. But of course, I think we all know that there are also keep out signs and welcome signs above doors like this. And just because we say on the inside that we are audience-centered or community-centered doesn't mean that it looks that way from the outside, somebody deciding whether to come in or not. So I invite you to think about who your doors are for, how you might open new doors with new communities for them. And I invite you as you do so to avoid two common pitfalls that I've seen. The first, especially common among larger institutions, is as you start doing this work, you end up building motels. You get in a situation where you say, oh, okay, we're going to build this door and this room for teenagers over here. Okay, this door and this room for moms with under threes. This door and this room for our donors. This door and this room for immigrants. Oh, the collection will go over here. And you end up having all these rooms next to each other, but not really connected. This causes two really big problems. On the outside, it causes a problem for our visitors because it means we're tracking them into only a narrow room among all the amazing things happening in our institutions. And on the inside, it's a problem because we end up in these constant battles about which room is the real room and which room will get new furniture and which room is not going to get a budget this year. We don't have to do it this way, even as we grow. I invite you to think about how you might open many new doors, many even ante-rooms that invite people in a way that really works for them, but then invite them further into a bridged experience with many people in a bigger room together. And of course, this is actually not the worst pitfall, and the one I really encourage you to avoid is this one, where sometimes we say, oh, you know what, instead of building a new door, let's do something easier. Let's just paint a fake door on the side of the wall. We'll put up a neon sign that says, hey, it's for you, welcome, come in. And then what happens, of course, is you can fool people once with this, right? Outsiders will come to that door, then they slam their head against it. They walk away rubbing their head thinking, what the heck just happened? And we're sitting there on the inside asking, why didn't they come back? You know, sometimes we do this by creating vanishing doors. We say, ooh, this weekend it's Dragon Festival, Chinese families, come in. Oh, okay, now that's gone, wait till next year. Or maybe you have a door that leads to just a very narrow vestibule of the depth of the meaning and experience that you offer. I invite you instead to courageously consider who are the communities you most want to involve. Get to know them, go to their space, learn what they value, what they treasure, what they're proud of, what they need. And then work together to frame out a new door, to invite them in, and to do it for so many communities that you end up building a bigger room together. Thank you.
There's time. I think it's 10 minutes. Yeah, it's 15 minutes. Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Nina. And doors are open for questions, comments.
please.
I think there are people with mics, but you can also stand up and speak very loudly. Someone will be bold and have a question. I'm confident of it. Okay, great. Okay, stand up so that the people with the mics can see you. Can we lift the house lights? Is that okay? Oh, okay, great. Can you stand up, please?
Oh, okay. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Of course, I wouldn't disagree with any word that you have been saying. I think most of us, and really appreciate the way you have built that. I was just wondering, you said that we decide what is relevant to us. I'm not sure that that is always the case. I think that there is a lot of things going on outside in the cultural world around us that tries to put us in some kind of thinking that makes that our own decision is not always our own.
Yes,
so that's one thing.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you for bringing that up. So the way I like to think about it is this, that we are all born and actually accrue over our lifetime a set of keys, some of which we opted into and some of which we didn't. I always think about how any of us get tracked into particular things that are offered to us, whether it's, oh, you're a female, go to this restroom, or whether it's something that's more capricious than that. And so I think, though, that when we talk about relevance theory and how we're deciding what is relevant to us, unfortunately, our perception of what meaning exists for us and how much effort is involved is very colored by those other things. And so often, if we have somebody, or if you yourself are feeling like an outsider in a place, there are many layers of those culturally or societally determined perceptions that we have to pierce through if we want to open those new doors. When I started writing the book, I was looking at commercial examples as well as nonprofit examples. I thought this was universally relevant. And then I really learned that, if you are a big enough company, if you have enough money, you can make anything relevant with enough money, right? But if we don't have the money to do the massive advertising campaigns to suggest that everybody should smoke or not smoke or whatever it might be, then we have to really start with what's inside of people. But absolutely, there are other ways to buy or coerce relevance. And I think my impression is most of the outsider communities who our institutions are most interested in involving are ones who are very societally tracked, not into whether they think something's relevant to them or not, but in terms of what's open and accessible and inviting to them. Also just note that many institutions, that meaning, effort, calculus is different for every type. And so, for example, libraries, I think, have very low effort. They've focused a lot on being as accessible as possible, but the meaning is a little hazy to some people. Versus something like an arts experience or a science center experience, there may be a perception that, oh, I could have fun with my family there, but maybe the effort involved to get there or to pay or whatever it might be rather high. So I think different institutions also have different balance in terms of, is the issue more on the meaning side or more on the effort side?
Okay, my turn? Okay. Okay, thank you. I love your story. Thank you very much. And I've just a question. I'm curious. What was the best door you opened yourself?
That's a great question. When I first came to the museum, it was seen, the building itself was seen as very unwelcoming. And people would say it looks like a jail, or it looks like an office building if they didn't know that it had been a jail. And one of the cheapest things we did was to put chairs in the elevator, brightly colored chairs. And they're still there. There are different chairs now. And the thing that the chairs in the elevator did is they created two senses. One, that there is going to be creativity throughout this building, even in places you don't expect it. And two, that we really care about your comfort in this space, even if it's ridiculous to have chairs in the elevator. And we are going to go to a ridiculous length in a very simple way to do that. So that was one of the simplest, effective things that people still comment on. And they never say, oh, I feel so much more welcome because there are chairs in the elevator. They just say, oh, I love that there are chairs in the elevator. But it's amazing how, we do all these little things, and there are some that really stand out. So that's sort of one that we did. A community first huge success for us has been with teens in our community, and specifically with queer teens, which was really not what I expected at all. A few years ago, we were part of a community conversation through C3 about where there were gaps in kind of cultural opportunities, and teens had a real desert. And so we started working with some teens to create a program that uses art to inculcate social change throughout the community. And what started as a staff-run program is now a youth-led program. And those youth are changing things around our community, but also inside our museum. So I'll never forget the time that teenagers came to a board meeting to tell the whole board that they thought we needed all-gender bathrooms in the museum. And we did make that change based on what youth were bringing forward about their needs and the things they were seeing as real assets for themselves. And so that program, and the fact that we were able to shift it from something that was staffed to really now something that's supported, that we just make space for, has been incredible. And actually just 2 weeks ago, that youth group won the Queer Youth Ally Award for our county. And we had to, when we got contacted about the award, we had to tell them, actually, the museum doesn't run this program. We don't get the award. It's these youth. And it's just been really incredible what they've done in opening doors for queer youth in particular in our community. Wow, okay, now people are getting energized, yeah. Okay, we'll save some for the discussion session. Yes, in the back. Yes.
Just a very fast question. Oops. Maybe you said it and I didn't get it. Could you give us back the name of the library in Australia or Australia?
Yeah, it's called the State Library of Queensland.
Thank you very much.
Of course. I think we could take maybe 3 more. Yeah. Maybe if the gal with the mic could walk forward. Okay, great. Yeah, there you go.
That we are living in a very highly fragmented society, and we have so many communities, and actually I think we are all outsiders and strangers somewhere.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether museums or your museum as a physical site is actually relevant. Or should we not close our museums and have to build or to, let's say, design blueprints and then to reach out to the community instead of, inviting the place to our place? So the question is, do you think that physical sites in the future are relevant?
I do, and here's why. But I don't think they're strictly relevant. So I guess I would say we spent my first 3 years at the museum focused on the physical site. Since then, we've focused almost entirely beyond the building. But here's something that's really surprised me about the building, because when I first came, I was a tear it down kind of person. I was like, we've got to disrupt this, the privilege, this building, even the word museum, this is a problem. Right now, we have an exhibition up that is a pairing of 2 things. Artwork by this amazing international artist, Hung Lu, where she's making paintings and tapestries depicting historic Chinese laborers. And we've paired her art with artifacts and stories and portraits of contemporary low-wage workers in our community now. And the bridging there is what makes this site meaningful, because when I talk to the gardeners and cooks who are involved in the contemporary side of the project, they say, if my story or my portrait is shared at the Day Worker Center, that's fine, but that's for my bubble of other workers like me. And the fact that you're putting it in partnership with this art, and at the opening, you're inviting me to have a conversation with the people who own these businesses in our town, who are, the drivers of policies that impact my life. It's a platform for a dialogue that I can't get in another space. And I think we have to be real about the fact that sites, any site, can be a place for a bonded few, or it can be a place for bridging. And I think it's about how we activate the spaces that exist, not that we need new spaces. I certainly think we should be programming in many more spaces throughout our community, but we have fundamentally focused on this bridging as the #1 need, and then also how can we use all the embodied privilege in our building to be a platform for voices and stories and artwork that does not get afforded this privilege typically. And we're working with foster youth right now on an exhibition based on their experience. As part of that, we've gotten the court system involved, and some of the youth art will be in the courts. And it's interesting how from our art museum perspective, we are thrilled that the art will be in the courts. But from the youth perspective, they're thrilled that their art will be in the museum. And just that thinking about what do different sites, who do they invite in, how do we consciously really focus on bridging in those sites. And then when we find those limits to what can happen in a site, how do we get more comfortable going outside instead of thinking by expanding or building bigger, we could maybe invite more of those people in. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Oh, yes. Wow. Nina, it's Lee Skolnick. Hi. I know we both agree that museums should and are becoming more community centers, but I also wonder, how does that affect the criteria for how we meet our mission? When does it stop becoming a museum and, chiefly become a community center?
Yeah, that's a constant debate in our community. One of my favorite comment cards we've ever had was from somebody who said, "What is this, a museum or a community center?" And then somebody else had written underneath it, "Can't it be both?" And I think we do kind of take the and approach. But at the end of the day, if I had to do a poll on the street, I would prefer if more people thought that what we were was a community center than a museum. And that is my own radical politics about what I want to be doing and how I want to be activating space. And I fundamentally think the fact that museums are seeking to be like other things, like community centers, like libraries, whatever it might be, gives a sense that maybe we're not so confident about what museums have historically been, and we want to be something different. And so you talk about the mission, we changed our mission, right? And we've changed that our impact statement is about, our ultimate impact we're trying to have is building a stronger and more connected community. We just brought on 4 new board members. Whenever we bring on board members, we always say, look, this theory of change is what we live and die by, it's what we plan by, it's what we evaluate by. Don't tell me that you don't like this exhibit. Tell me that it's not doing a good job building a stronger community or connecting our community. Hold my feet to the fire about our mission. Don't hold our feet to the fire about a vestigial idea about what this institution should be. But that is our choice and our mission, and I'm certainly very comfortable with the fact that different museums may make different choices. The thing that pisses me off is when museums co-opt the language of community to bring in money, but not to actually change what they do. And so I feel like any institution can have whatever mission it wants, and I support that. I just think you should courageously focus on what your mission is. Our mission happens to be about building community. We'll take one more.
Sure.
Okay, great. Maybe coming forward. See Sylvia?
Thank you. Nina, I love what you say, and your books are really inspiring, and I invite all my team to read them. But I always have a question when I'm reading you and when I'm listening to you. Does the size of the place where your museum is matters or not, and in which way? Because obviously many of the strategies you're talking about are applicable, and we should think about them in order to be friendly and open. But I live in a 20 million inhabitant city, so who is my community?
What a great question, and so true. So I think I kind of have 2 answers to that question. One is, no question that size matters, and that we are pursuing a strategy that is deliberately targeted to being in a smaller community and also to eschewing tourists. Even though Santa Cruz is a place many Europeans come to for the surfing and the experience, 92% of our visitors are local. And we like it that way. We plan it that way because our goal is to build a stronger community. And while I hope you'll all come visit, you're going to leave after that. And you're not going to help build our stronger community. So I'm not going to focus on tourists in that way. So I think that yes, and I guess I would also say, I think that in venues like this and in the professional literature, we tend to focus so much on big institutions, and so many institutions are actually smaller or in smaller settings that I feel okay about the fact that I'm just honest about, yeah, I live in this small, mid-sized world. On the other hand, when I work with colleagues from very big urban museums, they just have to be smarter about really defining being more specific about who are the communities of interest who we're focused on. And it's no longer about, I want everybody in my community to be there, but it's about, okay, I really want people who are, who are unbanked or who are, who have moved to this area in the last year or who are in this age band or whatever it might be. I really want to engage them and getting more specific about who those communities are. I think the beautiful thing that large urban centers have that smaller places don't is that everybody is there. And so you have a lot of opportunity to choose. Whereas I often have, we have some real problems where if there's a community of great interest for us, but the only trusted community leader in that community is somebody who doesn't gel with us for some reason, we're stuck. We have to move on to another neighborhood or another community group. In a big city, you have different opportunities in terms of defining those niches. But having lived and worked in big cities and with big museums, I made the conscious choice to be in a smaller place, and it is different, and I love it. Yeah. Thank you. We're going to do a discussion session after this, and signing books out right outside. And thank you.
Thank you for feeling. Thank you, Nina. You were so wonderful. It was great.